Hey Deep Divers, it's Julie B, and today I'm diving into Season 2, Episode 4 of Severance, Woe's Hollow. This unique episode was a disorienting foray into the wilderness for both the characters and us as viewers, as we went with them on their bizarre and unexpected outdoor retreat and team-building occurrence, or ORTBO. What a jarring and confusing departure from the normal routine we've come to know in the world of Severance. So let's dive into all the twists and turns. I don't normally use this format, but due to the unusual nature of this episode, I'm going to proceed in chronological order, but this is not a recap. I'll give you my ideas, theories, and insights as we go through the scenes. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, I'm just going to get this out of the way right now, just to settle it once and for all and to simplify things for ourselves in this video. If you're watching this video, then you already know that the biggest revelation in this episode is that Helly is not really Helly. She's been Helena all along since the start of Season 2, undercover and pretending to be Helly, ostensibly to spy on the MDR department for the board. So keeping that in mind, just to simplify things, I'll be referring to her as Helena in this video, even though the big reveal doesn't come until the end. So stick around for my thoughts on that. The episode opens with a shot of Irving's face as his innie awakens on a frozen lake in the snowy wilderness as he sees Mark call to him from atop a cliff where his innie just awakened as well. Irving proceeds up the cliff, meets Helena, who has just awoken on a lower cliff, then they reunite with Mark and Dylan at the top. They hear the Kier hymn and follow the sound to an old TV which is inexplicably plugged into nothing at all, a sign that this nature environment could be some kind of a simulation. I personally think that it's real, though. It's possible that they rigged an old TV with some kind of batteries inside. I mean, in a world where they have the technology to literally put a chip in people's brains and sever their consciousness, I'm pretty sure they could probably rig an old TV with batteries to work on a cliff. In the video, Milchick welcomes them to this retreat and tells them that with their Audie's blessings, they'll spend the next 2 days walking through this place, Dieter Eagan National Forest. As Dylan wonders aloud who Dieter Eagan is, Milchick, as if he can hear him, responds that they'll find that answer in the 4th appendix, a book Kier dictated in the final hours of his life. He says it's a text of such sanctity that it is forbidden on the severed floor. He says it's in Scissor Cave, the grotto where Kier tamed the 4 tempers for the first time. He doesn't elaborate on how exactly Kier did this, but I think we can get a clue just from the name Scissor Cave. It seems fitting for the theme of severance, given that scissors literally sever things. So I think that it's meant as a metaphor. I don't think that Kier literally visited this cave and tamed the tempers there. This is just meant as some kind of a parable. But I think it implies that it's some form of severance is the means through which Lumen plans to tame the tempers, using the chips in people's brains. That's what I think we're supposed to get from this story, a clue to that. Because I think the end game of Lumen is to use these chips to balance the tempers and ultimately regulate human emotion and keep it to a flat level so that people can be kind of mindless children of Kier and as productive as possible. That's why we saw a quick flash of Gemma's face on that file that says Cold Harbor. And in each bin at the bottom of the screen, it had codes indicating each temper. And they weren't balanced. There were all different numbers assigned to each one and percentages. The file wasn't complete yet. So again, I think that this is Lumen's endgame, using severance, using these chips to balance the tempers, to tame the tempers. So ultimately, these chips will just be a more technologically advanced form of brainwashing. For more on my theory on Gemma and Lumen's endgame, check out my theory video on that topic. But moving on, Milchick warns, "Stray not from Kier's path, lest you roil nature's wrath." This ominous line makes more sense later when we learn Dieter Eagan's story. Once again, the language is pseudo-religious. The cult-like vernacular of the show is much more overt this season. Milchick also says there will be help along the way, and the MDR crew, as if on cue, see that help in the form of a Mark doppelganger in the distance, pointing to the right, and so they follow in that direction. Irving doesn't trust anything coming from the higher-ups at Lumen, but he goes along with it. Since he lost Bert, the blinders have completely come off, and he's done a 180 turn from the most devout follower of Kier to a completely disillusioned cynic. Love seems to truly blind people in this show, and this episode is a perfect encapsulation of that. While Irving can see all of Lumen's deception clearly after losing his loved one, Mark is totally blind to the deception going on due to his love for Helly, as we'll see later on. Now, I have to say, before I move on, just take a look at this gorgeous shot. One of many. This entire episode was aesthetically a feast for the eyes. Absolutely amazing cinematography. After heading in the direction the Mark doppelganger was pointing in, they see a Helly doppelganger pointing toward a cave. Now, these doppelgangers are bizarre for multiple reasons. They're clearly not being played by the same actors, so they're not exact copies. And the strangest thing about them is they aren't wearing winter clothing in this frigid setting. It's another hint that this outdoor retreat could possibly be a simulation. Either that or they're animatronic robots like Gwendolyn had been talking about in the season 2 premiere, how the Eagan CEOs in the Perpetuity Wing were animatronic at her old branch. That's another possibility, and I'm leaning more in that direction. Inside the cave, the group find the 4th appendix just where it was supposed to be, which is dedicated to Dieter on the first page, which states just simply, "For Dieter." Kier supposedly dictated this from his deathbed, revealing that he had a twin brother named Dieter, and when they were young boys, Dieter had begged him to go to the forest to live as paupers, to which he agreed despite his better judgment. He used the phrase, "My love for my twin unbalancing my judgment." There's that reference to imbalanced tempers, with that phrase, "unbalancing my judgment." Kier had not yet tamed his tempers at this point, remember, so they headed toward Kier had not yet tamed his tempers at this point, remember. So anyway, they ventured toward Woe's Hollow. And at this point, Irving interjects, "So we are to walk in the brothers' footsteps." Little did he know just how true and prescient this statement would become for him in this episode. Because just as Dieter became a victim of Woe's Hollow in this tale, Innie Irving would also meet his demise after an encounter with Woe in this same location. Irving himself reads the rest of this passage, describing in veiled and poetic terms what amounts to Dieter Eagan pleasuring himself in front of his brother and spilling his lineage upon the soil, aka his sperm. Essentially, it sounds like Dieter desecrated sacred ground. Historically, masturbation has been deemed sinful in many cultures and religions due to the wasteful spilling of semen that is meant for procreation. As the team continues on, they see a Dylan doppelganger who some fans thought were floating, but upon closer inspection, it's clear that his shoes are just deep in snow here. Mark asks Helena if she's okay as Irving eyes them with disapproval and suspicion. Then he asks Mark what they were talking about, and he says, "I don't trust her. I think she might be lying about what her outie saw. Night gardeners? It's clear you don't have an objective perspective due to your feelings for her." And he's correct, of course. Mark's love is blinding him to the signs in front of him that she is not who she seems to be. But having lost the love of his life, Innie Irving can see everything all too clearly now. When the group find a dead seal, Irving impulsively says they should eat it, not trusting that there will be food for them at the Hollow, and saying, "We don't even know where we are. We don't know what this is. We don't know anything." Again, you can see here he doesn't trust anything related to Lumen anymore, and it's understandable. His grief over Bert has turned to rage and complete and utter cynicism. Incidentally, the seal could be a clue that Irving's outie was a Navy SEAL, perhaps. His father was in the Navy, as evidenced by the old uniform we saw in his outie's trunk in Season 1. When they reach Woe's Hollow, in another gorgeous, breathtaking shot, might I add, they see all 4 of their doppelgangers looking down on them from a cliff atop a waterfall. And then Milchick appears, clad all in white. in contrast to the MDR crew, all in black, highlighting the show's theme of duality, light versus dark. He says, Kier's twin was always with him. That's why we provided the very same for each of you. Now let's get another key insight out of the way right now. It's possible that Kier's twin never even existed at all, that he was symbolic of Kier's shadow self, perhaps the wayward, viceful side of himself that needed to be eradicated in his eyes. If that's the case, Milchick's statement about Kier's twin always being with him could be a metaphor, like these doppelgangers who represent the dual selves within the MDR crew. It's as if they have twins who are always with them, literally inside of them. But that's another interesting theory that I'll get to later. But there's another interesting theory on this that I'll get to later. Milchick lies that they're at the tallest waterfall on the planet and have followed the path of Kier and Dieter, standing upon sacred earth. Irving, unimpressed, once the most pious follower of Kier, is now the most jaded and practical. So he responds simply, "We're starving, Mr. Milchick." Once again, he sees through the lumen facade now. Once at the campsite, they're greeted by 4 glowing tents in innie blue as Ms. Wong prepares them luxury meats, among other comforts Lumen has provided. And again, I'm really a broken record at this point, but look at this gorgeous shot. Just look at this. Amazing. Helena comes into Irving's tent and offers him a little seal made of snow, in case you were hungry, she says, a joke that Helly would likely make, since he'd been so eager to eat the dead seal earlier. But he's still not fooled, asking her what she saw during the OTC and telling her it's okay, it won't change anything. But she just retreats. Around the campfire, Milchick reads them all the disturbing tale of Dieter's death. He says Dieter lay around unwashed, unlike Kier, seemingly symbolizing how unclean and sinful Dieter was. He wanted to stay in the forest forever, abandoning their duty to return to their father, as Kier said they must do. Kier promises to look after his brother in the ether mill, saying they must go back. Then in graphic detail, a little too graphic to be honest, Milchick describes Dieter's eye popping out, his hair turning to moss as he clutches at it and pulls it out with bloody scalp, and essentially his transformation into a tree occurs as he screams in pain. Milchick says that Kier went down toward the pool of the hollow so that the waterfall would drown out his brother's screams, and this is where he first met the Temper Woe, a gaunt bride, half the height of a natural woman. Apparently, she communicated telepathically through her eyes and said, "This is your doing. You suffered his wantonness. Now he's no one's brother. Only Chaos's whore." This implies that it was Kier's fault somehow that he failed to curb Dieter's wantonness or sinfulness. So I think this is a clue that Dieter was really just a part of himself all along, a part of himself that needed to be eradicated. Because why would it be all of his fault that Dieter behaved in the way that he did? Why was it his responsibility to stop him? I think it's likely that he was just the shadow self of Kier that needed to die and be left behind in the forest, metaphorically. Dieter may have even been a hallucination of Kier, or a representation of the damage done to him from working in an ether mill from a young age. The full name of ether is diethyl ether, a term which contains the name Dieter if you remove the last 3 letters of diethyl and the first 3 letters of ether. So a Reddit user named K890 pointed out that in Season 1, we saw a painting of Kier and his wife Imogene working in a factory, which we can only assume was an ether factory, over a vat emitting vapors. You can see the painting right behind Irving and Bert here. Kier apparently did this from a young age, inhaling these harmful ether vapors which could have had neurological consequences. There were no safety regulations or child labor laws back then, so he may have experienced harmful side effects from inhaling the ether vapors all the time. Perhaps this is why when Kier started Lumen, initially it was a pharmaceutical company specializing in salves, because ether is highly flammable, and he may have experienced skin damage from working in the mill, getting burned. Some of the side effects of ether dependency are anxiety, depression, paranoia, mood swings, cognitive impairment, emotional numbness, and increased symptoms of existing mental illnesses. It's possible that Kier was so impaired by his contact with the ether that his obsession with taming what he termed the four tempers stemmed from his desire to cure his own afflictions. And maybe it made him so mentally ill that he started this bizarre cult to begin with. Also, it's worth noting that in the 19th century, recreational use of ether became a popular practice, and parties were sometimes referred to as ether frolics. Perhaps Kier even attended such parties himself. Frolic is one of the four tempers, and the use of the word frolic here seems too spot on to be coincidence. Kier may have ventured into the woods in an effort to heal himself, and he believed he had eradicated the damaged part of himself, Dieter. But there's another theory that we should consider, which involves Dieter being a real person. Recall that the fourth appendix said that Dieter spilt his lineage upon the soil. In my Discord watch party, a fan of Severance and a supporter of my channel, Matt Gilbert, offered a theory that the word lineage in this passage could be a clue that Dieter Eagan actually spawned his own family line of Eagans who were disowned by the rest of the family, like an illegitimate line. Perhaps because Kier regarded his brother as tainted by vice and wantonness. So perhaps Dieter didn't literally die, but was disowned and was basically dead to him, along with all his future progeny. When Dieter supposedly turned into a tree in the story, this could be symbolic of a family tree. There have been fan theories since season 1 that Rickon could be part of an illegitimate line of Eagans, so perhaps he's even a descendant of Dieter. Anyway, Irving clearly doesn't believe the story, asking if Kier's brother really died that way. He's turned from a pious Kier zealot to a fierce skeptic so quickly. Milchick insists that every word is truth. Then Helena busts out laughing about how this is the dumbest thing she's ever heard, and Mark joins her in laughing, as he's fallen under her spell of influence since he's fallen for her, thinking she's Helly, of course. And Milchick then orders Ms. Wong to throw their marshmallows into the fire as punishment. After he leaves, Helena continues to make fun of the Dieter story, but Irving isn't amused. He finally fully confronts Helena in front of Mark and Dylan, grilling her on the details of her story that she made up about her outie and the night gardener. He also berates Mark for falling under her spell and forgetting about the plight of his outie's wife. And he has a point there. He's not really thinking much about finding Miss Casey at the moment, the fact that he's actually married on the outside. This is where Helena makes her huge mistake. Her face turns into her ice-cold, true self and says, "It's okay. We all know Irving's upset because he can't ever see Bert again, and he's really lonely." This is said without any compassion at all. It comes out cruel, and as Irving later points out, Hallie was never cruel. At this point, after weighing the evidence on both sides and being on the fence for several episodes, I became convinced that she had been Helena all along. Helena definitely realizes she screwed up because when Mark comes to see her in her tent, she says, "That was mean of me to say that to Irving." But Mark still can't see what's right in front of him, literally. Then Helena makes what I consider to be another mistake, but Mark doesn't notice. She says, "Sorry if I'm distracting you from looking for her, your wife." Innies don't talk like that. She should have said your outie's wife, but she's not used to speaking like an innie. Then the two of them sleep together while bathed in the red glow of a heater, a clue to Helena's true identity as her outie, as red is associated with the outies. It's disturbing how she's doing this with Mark under false pretenses, pretending to be someone else. It's the equivalent of SA, and it's unacceptable. Helena's innie has a separate set of memories from Helena, and thus she is equivalent to a separate person, so Mark did not consent to sleep with her. He thought he was with Helly. Our culture glosses over the fact that women can SA men. People laugh at that concept and minimize it like it's impossible to do, that men would just be happy to be with a woman no matter what. That's repulsive and untrue. Helena did this with Mark under false pretenses. She is not the person he thinks she is. She is, for all intents and purposes, a stranger to him. Again, that makes this SA. We shouldn't gloss over it, normalize it, or call it making love. If Helena were a man and Mark were a woman and the same event occurred on the show, ask yourself, would you have the same response? You might be more inclined to call it SA. Well, it's just as reprehensible in this case, with Mark being a victim and a male. And I'll get into that a bit more in my episode 5 deep dive when I discuss the aftermath and his behavior in that episode, indicating the trauma that he's gone through. Afterward, Helena tells Mark, I didn't like who I was on the outside. I was ashamed. And I have to say, this actually has the ring of truth to it. I believe her, that she actually does feel some shame for the harm she's causing as an Eagan, at least on some level. She didn't ask to be born into this family, and while I'm not excusing any of her behavior, especially violating any Mark, I do think that she's being coerced by her family and that she's been coerced for her entire life into behaving the way that she does, and has never really known freedom. When she busted out laughing at the Dieter story, I also think that was genuine. For the first time in her life, masquerading as Helly, she was able to let out her pent-up frustration and be rebellious without real consequences. Ironically, this is the freest she's probably ever felt, despite taking the place of her innie, who is a literal prisoner. Anyway, Mark asks who she was on the outside, and when she doesn't respond, he says he doesn't care who she is out there, only who she is with him. He'll definitely regret these words. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the likelihood that Helena could wind up pregnant from this encounter. And I know some have theorized that maybe this was the intention for sending her in there, but I think that she was just sent in to be a mole, to be the eyes and ears for Lumen, a human microphone, if you will. I don't see any point in actually getting her impregnated by Mark, what they would have to gain from that. There's nothing that's special about Mark that they would need for her to get pregnant by him. Now, in season 1, there may have been foreshadowing to this event happening because there was a news report on TV with Natalie actually talking about an innie who had been impregnated while on the job at Lumen and was suing the company as a result of that. So we'll have to wait and see if this actually comes to fruition here. At the end of this scene, Mark starts glitching and seeing Gemma in place of Helena, as the effects of his reintegration process that he had begun with Ragabi are starting to appear. It's a truly trippy moment, and oddly enough, he just continues going back to making out with Helena right after, which I found kind of strange. I mean, wouldn't he have been put off by that? I mean, this technically is his wife. Yes, it's his Audie's wife, but I don't know. If it were me, I would have been weirded out by that. Like, oh yeah, that's right. I am married on the outside, and she's kind of being held prisoner at Lumen right now, and who knows what kind of torment she's being subjected to at the present. But anyway. Meanwhile, Irving wanders around searching for Milchick and seems to get lost, falling asleep outside in the snow. Then we see an incredibly disturbing nightmare. He wakes up dressed in his suit like it's a normal workday, and suddenly he's in a terrifying forest full of bent, twisted, bare trees, like something out of a horror movie. He finds a set of 4 cubicles right in the middle of the woods and just sits down at one, glances up, and then sees Bert rolling down their cubicle divider to share a creepy look with him. Then, looking across from him, Irving sees the gaunt, ghoulish bride, Woe, sitting there and typing, staring at him. This seems to be foreshadowing of his impending demise as an innie. On his screen, the file name is Montauk, probably a reference to the Montauk Monster, an initially unidentified deceased animal that had washed up on the beach in Montauk, New York. There were many conspiracies about what it was, but officials eventually determined that it was just a water-degraded raccoon. Anyway, Irving stares at his screen, and the numbers start swirling around, turning into clusters of letters that form the word Eagan, and then eventually form the shape of a face. This gives Irving the epiphany that Helena had been pretending to be Helly all along, and she's actually an Eagan. That's how she was able to do it, because she's an Eagan. In dreams, outies seem to be able to communicate messages or bleed through memories to the innies, and maybe vice versa too. I believe that the unconscious mind remains unsevered. So essentially, outie Irving was sending innie Irving the message that Helena is an Eagan, validating all of his suspicion of her. Outie Irving has investigated Lumen a great deal on his own, so he certainly knows that Helena is an Eagan. And based on what we saw in Season 1, Episode 9 and 10, Irving seems to be using sleep deprivation to send his innie messages through dreams. He stays up late into the night drinking coffee and blasting rock music to stay alert. Then he paints pictures of the export hall to the testing floor elevator over and over again, which he might have seen at some point as an innie and just doesn't remember. Or somehow he found out about it through his investigation into Lumen as an outie. But either way, he's trying to send his innie a subconscious message to go find this place, in my opinion. The sleep deprivation causes himself to often doze off at work. Then he dreams and sees black paint oozing everywhere. So this is an outie memory bleeding through. And it might work both ways because somehow outie Irving knows what the export hall looks like. Again, it's possible that innie Irving has been there at some point, but his memory was wiped of that experience. Sleeping on the job is discouraged strongly by Lumen, and this is probably because the management is aware that messages or memories can be passed to the innies through their subconscious. Looking back, Irving's dreams of the black paint pouring into his cubicle are an elegant metaphor for his outie memories bleeding through to him. At this retreat, it's the first time that innie Irving has had the opportunity to actually sleep for a substantial amount of time. Remember that innies never get to actually sleep, and they can get in serious trouble if they doze off, usually the break room. But they let him off easy in one case last season and actually just brought him to the wellness center for a session. So finally, innie Irving was able to sleep long enough to have a dream that gave him a true epiphany, and not just the memory of all of this black paint. One other thing I want to point out. The letters of the word Eagan also formed the shape of an eye in this shot, thus communicating the message to Irving that Helena Eagan is a mole who is spying on them. What an absolutely genius way for the show to depict this reveal to Irving. The next morning, Helena wanders off by herself and seems to be genuinely enjoying looking at the waterfall with a peaceful expression on her face, seemingly content to experience the love that she's never known as the object of Mark's affection. Of course, she has no right to be feeling this way or taking advantage of Mark, but again, I've already gotten on my soapbox regarding that, so we'll move on. But then this peaceful moment is quickly broken when Irving shows up and points out where Helena went wrong. Again, what she had said to him about Bert was cruel, and Helly was never cruel. So he's finally got her pegged. That dream made it all coalesce, and he's 100% convinced now. He questions her. Who would have the power to send their outie to the severed floor? Realizing she's been exposed, she simply says, "I'm sorry," which is equivalent to a confession, and it actually looks and sounds pretty sincere. I don't think Helena is a cartoonish villain. She's morally reprehensible for what she did to Mark in this episode, and for what she's complicit in doing to the innies along with her family, but she's a complex character, and I think we'll find that her backstory will continue to humanize her. Any well-written origin story of a villain will motivate us to empathize with them in some regard, even if we can't condone their actions. Then, in a shocking turn, Irving grabs her violently, drags her to the hollow pool, and screams to Milchick that he'll unalive her if he doesn't turn her back into Helly. It's really amazing to see Irving in this state. I mean, I just never thought that his character was capable of such an action, but here we are. As his coworkers, Mark and Dylan, yell for him to stop, he pushes Helena's head under the water repeatedly while demanding that Milchick turn her back. He declares that she's an outie and an Eagan mole, and she has been ever since she came back. Looking back, this event was eerily foreshadowed in the stop-motion animated training video from Season 1, Episode 1, which showed the MDR crew bobbing for pineapples and Helly sticking her head underwater. Irving seems like he really does intend to unalive Helena if Milchick doesn't comply, as she gasps for air and he pushes her head underwater over and over again in harrowing visuals. I think he really would have gone through with it too. This is the dark turn his character has taken now. He's become so full of rage and disillusionment toward Lumen that, after they'd essentially killed Innie Burt, he'd actually resort to murder of an Eagan. Helena screams at Milchick to turn her back, addressing him as Seth, his first name, which Innies are not permitted to know. Irving defiantly reiterates the name Seth with venom in his tone, as Helena has essentially just confirmed to everyone that Irving is correct and she is an Eagan, since she has that information, and she's also asking Milchick to turn her back. Milchick uses his walkie-talkie and tells someone to remove the Glasgow block, which is one of the chip functions that was teased to us in the Season 1 finale, when Dylan was in the security office looking for the overtime contingency function to switch them to their innies. Other functions included beehive, goldfish, elephant, clean slate, open house, lullaby, and freeze frame. I hope we'll get to see more of these in action before the series is over. I think beehive likely means creating a hive mind for multiple workers. Elephant would give them the ability to remember everything while in that mode. As per the saying, elephants never forget. Goldfish would give them an extremely short memory, as per the saying that goldfish have that extremely short memory. Clean slate would wipe their memories, and freeze frame would probably make them freeze in place and would allow the company total autonomy over them in that mode, I think. As for lullaby, maybe it just puts them to sleep. The possibilities for what these functions could do are just mind-boggling, and I truly hope the show will explore more of them, as they hopefully are not just Easter eggs for us to theorize about. With an elevator ding in the score, Helena turns back to Helly for the first time this season, stunned and confused. Imagine the trauma she just went through. Her last memory was being tackled at the Lumen Gala after exposing their abuse of innies, and now she wakes up underwater, almost drowning. I think we can be reasonably sure that this is really Helly from now on in this season. The ding in that score was the signal to us as the audience that it's really her now. And if they try a mole twist again, it would just be redundant. In the aftermath, Milchick commences with what can only be described as an execution of Innie Irving. He demands that he stand up and tells him that for threatening collegial murder, there can be no penalty but immediate and permanent dismissal. I found it odd for him to use the term collegial. I mean, I know it's just semantics, but Helena is not a colleague. She's an executive. And Eagan, clearly not on the same level as him, not his colleague, but anyway. He also tells Irving that he won't even be given any valediction, meaning no chance to say goodbye. Dylan, heartbreakingly, yells down to him that he's sorry and should have listened to him, and Irving casts this equally heartbreaking look up at him, saying, "It's okay, it's all okay. Just remember, hang in there." There's a double meaning to this. He's reassuring and comforting his friend as he's about to leave him, probably forever, and also the "hang in there" carries the ring of a hint to something yet to be revealed, which indeed is revealed in episode 5, and I'll get into that when I deep dive into that. Milchick tells Irving he's not authorized to speak to any severed employee anymore, nor they with him. He orders him to walk into the forest. Honestly, I have to say, Irving didn't need to comply with his orders. I was kind of yelling at the TV, like, what are you doing? You have nothing left to lose at this point. He's going to just switch you off anyway, so you might as well just do whatever you want with your final moments. His fate was already sealed, so he could have said or done anything else he wanted until the moment that his chip was deactivated. But he complies, although before he does so, I will say, he gets right up in Milchick's face in one final satisfying act of defiance. Then, as he walks toward the forest, he truly has the haunting look of a man marching toward a gallows or the guillotine, because that's the equivalent of terminating an innie. This is an execution. Innie Irving is a distinct person, separate from outie Irving. His consciousness and unique set of memories will be, for all intents and purposes, deceased. This was also made clear when Irving was on the verge of quitting in the season 2 premiere. Dylan essentially talked him off the ledge, reacting to him exactly as a friend would react to someone attempting to unalive himself, because that's exactly what he was trying to do. Melchick here sounds like judge, jury, and executioner, and indeed, that's what he is in effect. He tells Irving, your workspace will be cleared and any personal items discarded. Your file, including any and all professional interactions and personal relations, will be purged and destroyed. It will be as if you, Irving B., never even existed or drew a single breath upon this earth. May Kier's mercy follow you into the eternal dark. Truly a chilling statement. And if it wasn't already glaringly obvious to the viewer, that last line about Kier's mercy could make two things clear. First, that this is the equivalent of an execution, and second, that this is clearly a cult of Kier, worshipping them as their god, as if we couldn't already tell that. It's absolutely brutal to tell Irving that not only will he be eradicated, but that all traces of his existence will be purged, so it will be as if he never even existed. There's nothing worse that you could say to a human being, and yes, innies are human beings, not subhuman as Lumen views them. There's one flaw to this statement, though. There's one thing that will still remain, ostensibly, and that would be the memory of Irving in the minds of his coworkers who love him. They're like his family. It's possible that Lumen could have a technique for erasing their memories of Irving's existence, but I don't expect this to happen. So Melchick's statement isn't entirely accurate. Innie Irving will still live on in their memories, so it won't be as if he never existed at all. Just like a man walking to his death, Irving takes one heartbreaking look back at his friends, who are essentially his family, again, the only family he's ever known. It's devastating to watch, and the final shot of Irving's face is a callback to the opening shot of the episode, which was also a close-up on his face, making this an elegant bookend to the episode. Irving looks at peace with what's about to happen and calmly closes his eyes, like a man who knows he's about to die but has accepted it. He doesn't tense his facial muscles at all. He looks ready for this to happen. Irving just hasn't had a reason to go on anymore since he lost Bert. He did want it all to end in the season 2 premiere. He says he wants it to be over, that he wants the pain to be over. But he stuck around for his friends until he realized that Helly was an imposter, and at that point, he was willing to do whatever it took to expose her in this episode. So he went out a hero to the MDR team because he protected them from her and the company's spy operation. It's just unfortunate that he had to go to such extremes and come so close to actual murder, but he did what he felt he had to do to expose her and protect the only thing that still mattered to him, his friends. It's interesting how Irving encountered the Temper Woe in his dream at the Hollow, just as Kier encountered Woe in the 4th appendix story. And ultimately, Irving walked to his death in the forest, much as Dieter met his death in the forest, according to the story. So what Irving said earlier in the episode, quote, so we are to walk in the brothers' footsteps, unquote, as I said before, that was an eerily prescient statement for him because he truly did walk in both brothers' footsteps by the end of this episode. So the question is now, what happens next for Irving? Based on the finality of Melchick's words, I wouldn't be surprised if they remove the chip from his brain, so there may not be a way for him to even try to get reintegrated, and thus his innie truly would be dead, permanently wiped from existence. Unless Lumen truly doesn't know that reintegration is possible. But I've always had the impression that they know it's possible, and they just won't admit to that awareness and want to cover it up that it can actually be done. Now, I want to know what you think. What do you believe the story of Dieter Eagan really meant? Did he actually exist, or was he merely a part of Kier himself, which had to be eradicated in his mind? Was he a delusion of Kier? Or could he be the father of a disowned and illegitimate family line? Could Irving get reintegrated, or do you think they may have taken the chip out of his brain to prevent that from happening when he was terminated? What did you think of the Helena reveal and what happened between her and Mark? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and check out my weekly Severance lives on Mondays at 10:15 p.m. Eastern. And until next time, keep on deep diving, and let's see what we can uncover together.